Hello there. What is going on, everyone? Today we're talking about Highlander, otherwise known as Singleton or no duplicates. What is it? And talking about some pros and cons to this fundamental approach in list building, deck building, army building. Basically, when you are getting ready to put a list or deck or build together for anything from a card game to a skirmish game, it's a fundamental approach to how you build and how you prepare your force for combat. And I want to talk about some pros and cons to this approach. If you guys are new here to the channel, we talk a lot about Star Wars and tabletop games and wargaming in general. We'd love to have you stick around. We are doing a big $50 Amazon gift card giveaway that's running through Halloween. You have plenty of time to enter to win that. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. Let me know if you have ever done the Highlander approach. So basically, what is this? It is the concept of having no duplicates. So if you're playing, if you're building a Magic the Gathering deck, for example, it would be only one of any given card. If you're playing Legion, it would be, only one unit of Stormtroopers. Obviously, Stormtroopers would have at least 4 in there, so you're going to have duplicates with the, miniatures. But the idea is you're not intentionally duplicating anything. If you're playing Armada, it'd be only one of any given ship type, and so the concept of that has a lot of pros and cons, and I want to talk about 4 of each. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. First off, I want to talk about the visual. It's a pro. We're going to do 4 pros first. There's a huge visual appeal to having duplicates. I think it's very gratifying. It can be enjoyable. For me personally, this is something that I really like to do. I like to have a variety of ships on the table if it's Armada, or different types of units if I'm playing Warhammer, especially like big and small and everything in between. It adds a lot of variety. It makes everybody kind of stand out, and I think it makes your army or your list or your fleet look a little more visually appealing. And that can be a very cool thing. It's also especially a nice thing if you're playing in public somewhere, too. If you're playing at a game store and trying to maybe potentially attract new people to your local gaming group, having a beautiful or a visually appealing list can be a very good thing, as opposed to if you're just trying to min-max and you have, all of the same thing. It might not look as cool. It may look like more of a boring game for passers-by. So I think the visual appeal is certainly one to be considered. Moving up next is variety. I promise you, they're not all starting with the letter V, but the first 2 do. Variety is an important thing of course, in a Highlander approach. It means that you're going to have a lot of different types of units in your build, in your fleet, in your army, in your list. You're going to possibly be prepared for a much wider type of opponent. It could be an all-comers list. It could be something that has a little bit of an answer for just about any situation. This is helpful for if you don't know what type of opponent you're going to be playing against. This could be useful in a tournament. This is also nice if you're playing a game that has different objectives and you're not sure if you're going to have to be very mobile, or if you're going to have a lot of glass cannon type firepower, if you're going to need to be very tanky, or if you're going to need to have like magic effects or special like control effects and things like that. If you have a little bit of everything, then you are prepared for a much wider array of opposition. Moving on to number 3 for the pros, it is the ability to learn. This is especially a nice thing if you are new to a game, or new to a faction, or new to a different kind of format. The ability to learn a lot of different units all at once. This is a great way to kind of wet your whistle. And so what I like about this approach is, let's just say you're jumping into Star Wars Legion and you're jumping into the Shadow Collective, and you're going to try to run as many different types of units as possible for your first game, because maybe that'll give you a good quick kind of flavor of what everything does, and this way you can then fine-tune your approach for a follow-up game. I like to do stuff like this very often because it makes that first game a lot less pressure. I don't have to worry as much about, if I win or lose. I want to make sure that my goal of the game, of course you want to win, right? Of course you play to win. But one of my bigger goals for that game is I want to make sure that I'm absorbing as much as I can of what all these units do. I want to. I played an all new faction in Warhammer Age of Sigmar the other day, and I was trying out ogres, and I tried them out, and I said, I don't really care if I win here. My goal is to make sure I have an understanding of how this faction feels, how the different units work, what everything does, and did I actually get to do some cool stuff. And having a wide variety in that list was able to kind of say, oh, okay, I can see my shooters do this stuff, my guys who charge do this stuff, my leaders function this way, and some of that synergy I could start to see, and that gives me a better idea of maybe how I want to build follow-up lists. So a great way to learn and get exposure to a new faction is one of the nice benefits of the Highlander format. And fourth on this list is that it's a great casual format. It's a great casual format. It keeps gameplay kind of light and fluffy, and sometimes it's nice to be light and fluffy, especially if you're playing a new player, or especially if you're playing against casual people. Sometimes the Highlander format will be encouraged by local meetup groups and local stores. Maybe a certain night of the week is like Highlander night or something like that, because it can be a great way to not be quite so competitive, not quite so win at all costs, because again, sometimes it can be, it feels bad if you're like a newer player and you go to play against somebody and then they have like, oh, okay, well, I have these guys are the most like best damage per cost ratio, so I've maxed them out so this way I can like win on turn one and they'll just crush you into oblivion. And a lot of times a Highlander list is usually a little bit more gentle and a little bit more fun for both you and your opponent, and that can be really great for a casual meets competitive kind of environment. So it's definitely leaning a little more towards the casual side, but tends to make sure that everybody has a good time, and I think that's definitely a pro. Now, we've talked about 4 pros, but there are some cons to the Highlander format. I'm going to talk about those as well. Let's talk about the first one, and maybe the most obvious, is less synergy. You'll have a little bit less synergy within your list typically when you're running Highlander. The idea is, hey, this guy gives all other dudes around him a bonus if they, do their big shot. Well, now I only have one of those guys that can do that big shot because I got all kinds of different stuff. And so it means I might not be able to maximize on a specific mechanic that my list is trying to do. Again, that's obvious because that's a direct contrast to the whole concept of variety. If I'm going to have a whole lot of variety, that means I'm going to be less focused on one particular discipline. And that is definitely one of the drawbacks, is while you basically might not be as good if you can't synergize and maximize your combat effectiveness with one particular course of action. So that's definitely something to think about. Another con is, I wonder if a lot of people don't think about this as much, as there's a lot more rules to remember if every single unit that you're bringing does something different. There's a lot more reminder text. There's a lot more war scrolls or unit cards, a lot more things, a lot more possibly rules reference guide, rules to look up and interactions to look up. Oh, how does this guy work with this guy? Oh, what does this guy do again? Oh, he's slightly different than that dude. So there's a lot more rules and things to remember. And this also, if you're playing a game that has upgrade cards too, if you're applying that same mentality to upgrade cards too, it's a whole lot more things to remember, a whole lot more timings to remember. Again, if you're contrast to this, if your whole list is like hyper focused, you're going to know that nothing happens at the start of the turn for your unit, so there's less things for you to try to remember and keep track of. And so if you're running a whole list, everybody's different, a whole lot more things to keep track of, to try to remember to do, which can potentially lead to a little bit of a feels bad, because that's one of the things. While winning at all costs isn't usually super important for me, at the same time, I don't want to lose because I made a mistake. I don't want to lose because I forgot to do something. I don't want to be a fool and lose that way. I'd rather lose because I'm like, oh, well, you just outplayed me, but we had a great game. I'd rather be like, oh, I should have done that thing. I had the kill switch and I forgot to push it. So that can happen a little bit when you have a whole lot of different units with different rules. Let's talk about factions. This is an interesting one because it applies a lot more to like Star Wars Legion, Star Wars Armada, and basically Clone Wars factions. Depending on what game you're playing, you may not have that many unit types. So depending on what faction within a game, like I'll say the Republic, for example, you kind of have a very difficult time to try to do a Highlander format. Because especially right now, you really only have clone troopers as your core. And so you physically just cannot do it. And there's ways to try to mitigate. You could do some kind of hybrid version, but really, like, it becomes much harder and harder. Star Wars Armada, for example, only has 4 Republic expansion, or 4 ship types. Well, 5 if you take into account rapid reinforcements. But it makes it a lot more difficult when you don't have as many options. Whereas if you're playing the Empire and you have tons of options, or if you're Warhammer, if you're playing Space Marines, maybe you have more stuff than more of a smaller thing. Or maybe Age of Sigmar, if you're playing Stormcast Eternals, you have a ton of things. But like ogres have a whole lot less. And if you're playing an older game, there may be less things in prints that you can only get what is available. And so, again, depending on what faction and what game you're playing, you may have far fewer options to try to make this happen. And maybe one of the more obvious cons is it does prevent another fun factor, which is theme. It can help if you're playing Highlander. It can really limit the fact that you might want to do a themed list. You may want to do something that's more thematic, whether it's like a battle force or some kind of sub faction, like I want to run all Ewoks or all Wookiees, or maybe you just want something that just seems more thematically appropriate, like I want Darth Vader with a whole bunch of stormtroopers because that just seems like it's the Empire. Things like that, or if you have a mechanical theme, like I want a whole bunch of ships that have really strong frontal firepower, because that's then I want to march them all together. Well, you may, in order to do that, you might have to kind of have a lot of duplicates of the same type. So again, if you're running Highlander, it does prevent you from doing quite so many thematic lists. Although there are still some that can happen, but it's much harder to do. Unless, of course, your theme is that we're all uniques. We're all individuals. If that's your theme, then fine. But it does prevent a lot of thematic lists. Let's look at some pros and cons of the Highlander format. Let me know if you guys have ever played Highlander or Singleton, or what you call it, what your local meta calls this type of format of having no duplicates. And what do you think some of the best approaches and the best ways to look at this format and to apply it in your local gaming groups could be? I personally think it's great for newer players to create a more welcoming and less intimidating environment, as well as give people a lot of exposure to really fun and new units. Let me know what you think in the comments below. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Big thanks to my patrons. You guys are absolutely out of this world and help make the whole channel possible. Thank you for your continued support. I will talk to you later. May the force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes. Always wash your socks and have a great day.